What got you there with What got you there with Sean DeLaney?
I'm Sean DeLaney, and on this episode of What Got You There, I sit down with Brett Thomas, co-founder and managing partner of CAVU Venture Partners, which is one of the biggest investors in health and wellness and the best brands you see out there. Brett, welcome to What Got You There. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this one, but I want to start not with what you're doing today, but kind of dive back into history a little bit. And I know you were a competitive athlete growing up, played Division I sports. What was the drive for you early on?
Drive in terms of playing sports or just kind of?
I'm thinking about that overall mentality, right? Like to reach Division I athletics, there must have been something in you. I'm just wondering what that was at an early age.
Yeah, that's a good question. I've never been asked that. Listen, I'm 6'5". I was always the tallest kid in all of my classes. In every soccer photo, I always wanted to be the one holding the ball like in front. And unfortunately, I was always told, you got to be, in the back row because you're so tall. But I was naturally athletic as a kid. I loved sports growing up. I was the youngest child in the family, and my older brother and older sister played sports. So I think as it goes, the youngest just kind of like follows suit. And I found success early on in sports. And it was a great confidence builder for me. I think academically earlier on, I was a decent student, okay, but I definitely found my confidence and sense of worth on the athletic fields. And, it's funny, I reflect back on lessons learned through sports. I played tennis competitively in college, Division I, but ultimately I chose tennis because it was my worst sport. And I kind of think back on that decision today with kind of some what ifs in my mind, because I was a better football player. I was better at swimming. I was better at all the other sports. But for some reason, when I put a tennis racket in my hand, I was the most clumsy person you've ever seen. And it was just the coordination, and it just didn't make sense to me because other sports came so easy and I looked more of a natural, where I looked like I was the worst tennis player on the court. And I think that wanting to get better was something that was frustrating to me earlier on. And I literally, spent, a good chunk of my childhood focusing on trying to get better. I got to Division I. I had higher hopes, obviously. But I think that drive, I think it probably started because I had some ability in sports. It came a little bit easier to me maybe than others at that age. But then the lessons you learn, and as working within a team, setting goals, short-term, medium-term, long-term, and starting to see like the practice and the dedication that's required in order to be better was just, those are lessons that I still take today and apply not only in the business world, but also as a parent with my children and wanting them to be a part of team sports and really experience those interactions.
Wow, that mindset is ridiculously interesting. I feel like I got little chills there because most hyper-competitive people, like they want to strive for their best, but then tackling your worst sport. I mean, that's a pretty unique angle. So I think we're kind of tapping into here, kind of what's made you successful thus far to date. I am wondering, playing Division I athletics, of course, you're getting repetitions, practice, things like that. Is there anything you do like that now that we can view as like mental or on-job training, similar to practicing your forehand every single day?
Yeah, it's funny. I think humans have a tendency to focus on their strengths. And I actually did that as well. We talk about, use the tennis analogy. I had a great forehand. My backhand wasn't so good. So instead of spending more and more time focusing on that particular weakness, what did I do? I developed a forehand where I'd run around most of my backhands, and I was good. I got good at it. But I think the ultimate overlying theme is to be a Division I athlete or to do anything that you're passionate about and to do it at a high level, you have to have that kind of discipline. And I think for me now, where time has gotten a lot more challenging, I'm a parent with 3 children, married, and all the demands of balancing work life. I think you have to have that discipline of staying in a pattern in terms of consistency. And for me, the biggest thing is just exercising in the morning. I wake up at 4:45, 5 a.m. every day. And, I'm lucky living in Los Angeles. I'm able to do stuff at home. Or we can go outside. It's beautiful, obviously, for a run or take advantage of the hikes. But I'm out there probably every day, Monday through Friday, at least, 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. is kind of my time where the kids mostly aren't up. Some days they will be, but I can go downstairs and get that hour of just focus and kind of focusing on myself. And I don't answer emails because, you get sucked into the time difference between East Coast and West Coast. And there's stuff to, and I try to put my phone down and I just focus on myself for that 45 minutes, an hour every day. And that balances me so well in terms of any stress that might be going on. Obviously, endorphins happen and you just come up feeling refreshed, ready to go and start your day. And I find if I am carrying stress, that's a great way for me to relieve it and, start the day excited, positive. I mean, my wife always laughs at me. I don't drink coffee. And so I literally start the day happy and ready to go. I fade as the day goes along and I've started drinking matcha, but I definitely start the day off, in a manner of ready to go.
You mentioned the no coffee, staying positive throughout the day. I mean, with what you do at CAVU, I mean, you guys are at the forefront of health, wellness, everything like that. And this doesn't have to be a product or workout routine or anything like that. I'm just wondering, are there things that you do that you think just so exceedingly impact your positive mindset and just your overall health?
I think exercise is a big piece of that. When I was in my 20s and living in New York City and working for a hedge fund and it was a very unhealthy lifestyle. And, you think back, I'm 41 now. And when I was in my 20s, what you were putting in your body, the food, the hours you're keeping, obviously you're young, single, new to New York, you want to go out and experience that social aspect. It was just took a heavy toll, I think, and I think it happens still to this day in terms of the physical and mental toll it takes. And I think it hasn't been until recently, mentally, the impact, right? We take physicals every year for our physical health to make sure that everything is working okay and that there's no warning signs or anything wrong. And then we haven't spent a ton of time on the mental aspect of it. And then I think one of the best things to come out of COVID, there's been a lot of bad things that have come out of COVID. One of the best things is just the focus and removing the taboo away from speaking about mental health and making it a focus, making it a priority. And so I think that combination of spending time and being a little bit selfish and taking your time to focus on you, whether it's through exercise, whether it's going for a walk, whether it's socializing, whether it's taking a day off in a mental day, just to say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to look at my phone. I'm going to clear my calendar and just kind of go do something that, get out of the house and go enjoy life or spend time with your children. I think you need those interruptions here and there to kind of break it up because it happened to me when I was young and it still happens to this day a little bit where you get in these grinding periods. It's grind. And a lot of people who've played sports, who've worked in banking, it becomes part of their everyday life. And ultimately, if you're not taking care of yourself, then it's going to catch up to you really quickly.
Yeah, it's funny. I was one of those in my 20s, just grind. And then you reach that breaking point and all of a sudden you realize life works in oscillation. You need those stress recovery periods. So building those in, yeah, I mean, I'm in complete agreement with you there. I am wondering, because I feel like one of your really unique skills is just kind of overall, let's call it pattern recognition and sensing trends. So what is your information diet like that you can kind of just encapsulate all of this and then really find those white spaces where others aren't seeing it?
I get that question a lot. And it's funny. I grew up as a young boy. My grandfather, who's a huge role model in my life, he was a bathtub chemist, right? He came over from Russia and he was watching a car get cleaned. And he noticed a bunch of grease on the floor and the car wasn't getting clean. And so he went home, fooled around in his bathtub and created auto polish products. And, I think, he was, I think he retired when he was 35 years old. Now he didn't make a ton of money, but, he lived conservatively. And, back then you could put your money in T-bills and live off the interest. And, this is Cleveland, Ohio. So the cost of living isn't that high. But I think I spent hours and hours in grocery stores in Targets and Kmart's. And my grandfather would walk up and down those aisles with me, and he'd stop at a product here and there and be like, isn't this interesting? You see, every good invention comes from someone's problem. And then we look at the bottle and like, look at the packaging. People judge a book by its cover. And so it was these early kind of lessons that kind of, you know, were taught to me at a very young age where, you know, if you have a product and has great packaging, it's going to drive trial. If the product is not great, well, then you're not going to have a customer or repeat business, and you'll have a very difficult time. But if you have an amazing product inside that packaging, then that customer and has a good experience, they're probably going to become a customer again. And that chain kind of goes on. Conversely, you'll see amazing products with horrible packagings. And we equate it to like the car. It's having a Ford Ferrari, right? It may look like a Ford on the outside and have a Ferrari engine, but the consumer will never, or probably won't, come into contact with that product as much and understand like what's really inside that if it has bad packaging or it doesn't draw you in. Where conversely, you have amazing packaging and an outward experience, but then what's inside the package is actually reversed, and it's actually a Ford engine and not a Ferrari engine. And so I think very early on, it was drilled into my head. I think, you know, I found myself in New York City, getting on a plane, flying to the West Coast a lot when we started CAVU. You know, I think I counted at one point in a 4-month period, I think I had 13 trips to kind of the Los Angeles, San Francisco area. And a lot of these trends, not all of them, but some of them have historically started on the West Coast. And you take kombucha. I mean, kombucha has been out and, you know, been around for a long, long time, but, you know, it was, if you'd come to Los Angeles, you would see kombucha in a lot of places on tap and things like that, where in the Northeast or places like New York City, right, which is one of the most sophisticated, affluent cities in the world, wasn't there yet. And so the challenging part is what's fad versus a trend? What can actually travel outside of this bubble of, you know, Los Angeles, Southern California, kind of California in general, the West Coast, and go more mainstream? And that's the harder challenge. But I think from an information survey to kind of answer your question and to land the plane, I read a lot. And when I was in school, if you told my 20-year-old self that I would be reading 2 to 3 hours a day, I would have probably laughed and said, no way. And I find myself reading a ton. And you have to kind of read, right? As the world's evolving, you have to evolve as well. And I take great joy and great learning in reading. And I think reading has been one of my biggest idea generations in terms of thinking through different things, learning from previous people's stories and examples, and how they did things, or way to lead an organization, or how to build a culture. You know, I've read all those books, and I find it very helpful. But then you also look at social media now. Social media is a great place where through Twitter, you see, now I don't participate in the conversations. I'm more of the, you know, the social media, I guess, stalker and not actual contributor. But you learn through these different discussions on Twitter in terms of, you know, human performance is a category where we've evolved into and looking at, to see actual customers or actual people going back and forth having debates about it. It drives conversation. You know, you look at social media, the Instagrams and the TikToks, seeing new products being advertised there, and they make it so easy to trial now, right? You just, you know, you scroll up, you hit Apple Pay, and you've got it in your house in 3 days. So it's a lot easier now to, I think, discover and experience new products, new trends real time. The hard part is there's a lot more noise in the market. So you've got to really get through that clutter and just to try to find that gem, or what we believe to be that next gem.
Yeah, when you can start filtering that signal from the noise, and you refine that a little bit on Twitter, that's incredibly helpful. The thing I love that you bring up about Twitter is not only do you get to see the idea out, similar like what you'd be reading in the book, but then you actually get to see thought leaders in the same space kind of debate back and forth. So you get varying opinions here. And then you can also see that people lesser in terms of like overall knowledge around that, they put their input too, which would be a real consumer. So yeah, that's a beautiful medium if you use that correctly. I am intrigued. I'm a huge reader as well. Any books that you've gone back to or you think have just really shaped who you've become?
I've actually never gone back to a book.
Oh, interesting.
I will, and it's fine. Never actually thought about this, and that's why I love chatting with you here. It kind of drives the thinking. I take notes in books, so I will refer back to notes. A lot of books that I focused on, tend to be more on nonfiction. I want to hear other people's stories because no path is the same. But there are common elements to people. And if you think about, well, I want to read about the people who've made it type of thing. Right. And that's a journey, right? I don't think you ever fully make it. It's like, it's the journey that kind of keeps on going, right? Where every day you're trying to be a little bit better. And I think it's those books where you have people that, it's Shoe Dog, right? It's the Phil Knight story and how he built Nike and how many bumps there were in the road. And even you look at Stephen Schwartzman's book, right? And Blackstone and you just see the mindset and you think, there was one thing that caught my attention. It's, we try to do everything. There's got to be an intensity and a speed. And, there was a part when Stephen Schwartzman was talking in his biography about how they were raising the first Blackstone fund. And there was a speed to kind of get it done and to not wait an extra few days or just let's go as fast as we can to do this fundraise. And they closed their first fund on a Friday. And I believe it was on a Monday, it was the 87 stock market crash in October. He says in the book, I don't think Blackstone would be what it was today if we waited an extra day. And that's something that I think back on. And there's always those expressions, strike while the iron's hot, and you get that momentum and time kills deals. It's so true. And it's hard sometimes because you need to be thoughtful. You don't want to rush just for the sake of rushing, but you always have to move with a speed of, we got to get this done yesterday. And that can be hard sometimes, but I think it's something that that really stuck out with me when I read that kind of, it was a paragraph or two describing this time in his life. And you think about that one day, and there's luck involved, and who would have known that, that event was coming? You wouldn't have. But just how life would have changed if, they didn't get that fundraise done and they waited a week, or they said, we'll wait the weekend and we'll finish up the following week. And a firm like that's been super successful may not exist in the same form it exists today. So it's crazy, when you read stories like that and all the twists and turns and all the turbulence that comes along. And that's kind of how with CAVU, when we started CAVU, the name, CAVU is a pilot's term. It's the perfect flying conditions. It stands for ceiling and visibility unlimited. So it's like the perfect flying conditions, the perfect day. And so our whole goal when we started CAVU was to kind of make those skies a little bit clearer, a little less turbulent for entrepreneurs, because it is a rocky journey to say the least. And there's a lot of highs and there's definitely a lot of lows. And I think staying even keeled and not getting too high, but not getting too low is something that, it's hard to do sometimes, but it's something that through experience we've gotten better at and tried to, when we work with our partners, try to, make sure that they realize they're on a journey, and that's the best part of it.
Yeah, you bring up turbulence, and I think that something that's very apparent in the majority of these biographies is just how turbulent and the ups and downs these entrepreneurs go through. Yeah, Schwartzman book I loved. I feel like you don't hear about that enough. He's got some great one-liners. You're talking about speed with him. I loved his stories with high school track and then running in college where he'd run to throw up every single day. You're talking about drive and work ethic. That's great. You were bringing up a point. This is one of the things I struggle with a lot, and I'm trying to think about this in terms of being able to be at a high enough level. So I picture this as zooming in and zooming out, right? You have to have a 30,000 foot pilot view, but then also dive into the weeds. How do you do that with all the companies that you're helping out?
It's hard. I think early on when we had a few companies, it was a lot easier, right? I would know everything about, not everything, but I would know most of the material information about every single company. But then as we start to expand, you really have to balance, getting out of the forest and kind of pick your head up a little bit and rise above. Because you can get in a mode of just kind of head down, grinding it out, focusing being in the trenches. And I think a good thing, my partner and I do, Rohan Oza, quite a bit, and other members in our team, is we kind of take a step back, at least quarterly, where we don't schedule any meetings or calls, and we kind of get a perspective, just in terms of, okay, like state of the business, like what's working, what's not working, learning from mistakes. I think taking a step back, you need to do it multiple times a year. And we actually probably should even do it a little bit more. But I find it's healthy because you pick your head up a little bit, and there's some stuff that's so obvious that we may be missing, or we shouldn't be doing, that we're doing, and vice versa. Picking that head up and stepping back and getting out of the business people talk about for a period of time is really helpful, whether it's a retreat, or even just a day or two of, hey, we're just not going to be in the same pattern you are of your daily life. Let's disrupt it a little bit. Let's take a step back, and let's kind of, see if we have a different perspective when we are not, buried in work and our typical day.
Talking about these high level perspectives, you were talking about your grandfather a few minutes ago. He gave you an excellent piece of advice of what you need to think through by the time you're 30. I would love for you to share this story, because I think this is really helpful.
Yeah. So I used to, he was a man of, well, listen, he retired at 35. And so he had a lot of free time. And so, we would go on a lot of adventures together. And one of the things in the fall in Northeast Ohio is mushroom picking. So again, when I tell people I used to go mushroom picking in the forest with my grandfather, they look at me like I'm crazy. But it was one of those long trips. And gosh, I'm probably 9 years old, and it's crazy that you can take something when you're 9 as a child, and it just still resonates with you. And his advice was, and I think it goes back to, how do you grind? How do you stay in, just that intensity of an athlete? I think it all comes down to passion. And my grandfather told me, by the time you turn 30, if you don't know, if you're working at a job and you're not passionate about it, you need to quit your job immediately and go out and pursue your passion. And his argument on that was, when you become 40 years of age and you're married and have kids and mortgages and all these other responsibilities, you're not just going to wake up one morning and say, to your spouse, I think I want to quit my job today to go follow my passion. It doesn't happen. And so I think the longer you stay in a job, it's that analogy of, it's your work has to be your passion at some point. And, I found myself in my 20s, working in a hedge fund. I didn't know what a hedge fund was. It was like that hot job out of college when, back in the 90s, it was like consulting, and then it was, tech in the late 90s before the bubble burst. And then it was and then hedge funds. And I barely knew what a hedge fund was. And I was lucky to go to a place that was founded by two amazing individuals, a guy named Adam Weiss and James Crichton. And I was the sixth employee there. And we were young. I mean, we had boxes for furniture to put things on. And, I found myself making probably more money at a younger age than I ever thought I could make, but I wasn't happy. I had gained weight. I was probably, borderline depressed a little bit. Talking about the biggest grind ever. Working at a hedge fund from, those 5 or 6 years that I did it, was probably the biggest grind of my life. And that's coming from someone who grew up, training before school, getting up at 4:45 in the morning and, going and working out before school, and then going to school and then working out after. And, that was and I also went to a tennis academy. I went to a place called Nick Bollettieri Tennis Academy in 8th grade and, played tennis from, 12 to 5 and conditioned for an hour after. That was the biggest mental grind of my life. And I remember the financial crisis was happening. So this is, 2009. My birthday was in May. And I remember really thinking about what my grandfather told me. It came back to my mind multiple times in my life. And I remember sitting there, and I had just gotten engaged, and then was on the way to get married. And I remember thinking to myself, I need to go follow my passion. And literally, this was in May of 2009 or April 2009. I talked with my wife, and she said, go for it, because you always regret it if you don't, which is true. And it's okay to make mistakes in life. It's just, my whole thing is no regrets. If you think you're going to wake up in 10 years from now and say, do you wish you did that? And you say, yes, I regret that I didn't go for that or take that chance. Like, that's the things I'm worried about, not failure. Failure is good. That's how you learn. But so I literally went in and said, I'm leaving. I forgot about the 2-week notice part. So I actually was a week late, but close enough. And so I found myself, 30 years old in 1 week, saying, okay, now what? And I was lucky that I saved a little bit of money. So I had, some cushion, but it wasn't an unlimited cushion forever. And so my passion was consumer brands. In a hedge fund or in the financial world, it's a scorecard every day. When you're trading, it's you make money or lose money. It's on paper, and it feels very numb, and you're not really building anything tangible. And yes, you're building an organization and a team, and you're helping provide jobs, and but just there wasn't anything tangible that you can build. And so I really wanted to be involved with consumer products. And I didn't identify then about kind of the health and wellness craze. So I left in 2009, started looking at consumer brands, investing in some of them. And my whole goal was to make mistakes in my own money, so that at some point in time when I was ready to take other people's money, I had that pattern recognition. I had, put in 5 or 6 years of experience and mistakes and learnings, so that when I took money from other people, I was in a good spot where I could manage that in a manner which they deserve, and with the results that they deserve. And so it was then I became a parent in 2010 for the first time. And my aha moment was actually my wife. I give Hillary, my wife, a lot of credit, because when our first child was born, and the way we looked at the packaging, and I give her most of the credit for this, probably all of it actually. And not only what we put in his body, but on his body, whether it was shampoos and lotions and the type of diapers, I was like, wow, this is the new millennial mom. This is not, I grew up in the Midwest on a diet of, I always joke, soda and chips and mac and cheese. And it wasn't my parents' fault. Like, we grew up in Ohio. Food was cheap, accessible, and efficient. It was quick. And so, seeing how that had changed, that perspective between how my parents fed me and our family versus what my wife kind of instilled early on, was my eye-opening moment of, there is a massive health and wellness secular tailwind that's coming to start in this country. And the premise was, if you give someone a chance to upgrade their life in some way, whether it's improve their sleep, improve their diet, look better, feel better, eat better, they're going to take it. But there's education, there's a bunch of gaps. So for me, that was my aha moment into focusing on particularly health and wellness, which matched up with my passion for consumer brands.
You mentioned the passion, and then you were talking earlier about the passion you had even for tennis. When you're grinding out in something you're so passionate, almost like those hard times, they don't seem as difficult. It's almost this fun challenge to overcome. And I love that alignment. When you can align that passion, that hard work, and the resilience that really comes with it. I am wondering now, though, like, I view this as games inside of the game. And with what you're doing now, like, what little thing do you get the most passion around within what you do day to day that most people probably would never even think about, but just like lights you up inside?
I think the passion, connecting it with, to your point, hard work, it doesn't feel like hard work. I'm working harder now than I've ever worked in my life. And yeah, it feels like it sometimes, but I'm having fun. I'm enjoying it. I love it. For me, it's not when you make money. And I know money gives optionality, and people always say, and being driven by money is the wrong thing. When I was in college, I didn't know what I wanted to be. I was like, oh, I'll go into finance because you can make money, and money allows you to have options, and that's where I'll start. It's, for me, it's the journey, and it's the journey of discovering a new product, a new brand, an entrepreneur that you've met, that you just sit in awe and being like, how in the world did they come up with this? Like, this is incredible. And the reason I got into this business too is I'm not clever enough or smart enough to start one of these companies on my own, meaning having that idea that's just like amazing, original, like way where the puck's going. My favorite quote is the old Wayne Gretzky quote of skate to where the puck's going, not where it's at now. And for me, it's that initial kind of spark meeting where you meet an entrepreneur or founder that you have no idea what the meeting's going to be like or how amazing their product may or may not be. And you walk away just inspired about, wow. And I want to be, and we want to be a small part of that journey. So if we can help in any way, I want to be a part of that because you're actually building something tangible that's actually changing lives. And I look back on what I was doing before and the scorecard, you lost Mai Tai? Okay. And you went home. Or you made Mai Tai? Great. But to actually be a part of building something day by day, that's actually going to be tangible. That's the thing with food and beverage, especially where we started in CAVU. Like, you can take a product or a brand and you can see people drinking it. And seeing someone drink one of our products that we are involved in and we backed a great founder, or we start ourselves, it's just really cool when you see someone on the street or a store grab one of those brands and experiences it itself. For me, that's where I get my kicks. It's not when, oh, great, the brand sold and people made money and you're happy, obviously, and you're happy for the founder and you're happy as a firm that we went from here to here and here's the outcome. But as I look back, I always get a little sad because that journey is kind of over. And that is the best part. And every founder I talk to, I know it's hard. I know it doesn't seem that way now, but you're going to look back and you're going to miss this time with all these challenges and, this is on fire, that's on fire. That journey is what makes it special. And you see it a lot of founders who are successful and they have a big exit and they make a lot of money. They get bored really quickly. They buy their house, they buy their car. Now what? It's not as what it's cracked up to be. And I think they always they miss it. They're like, I wish I didn't sell, or I wish I held on to it a little longer. That's something that for me, that journey is the best part of what I get to do every day.
Yeah, you bring up really interesting points there. One of those cool things, I mean, like when the hair on your back stands up, when one of those entrepreneurs walks in and it's just like, wow, the insight they have comboed with just like their drive, tenacity, smarts, everything like that. And then you're talking about kind of that evolution, that progression. And then all of a sudden that idea comes to fruition, product in hand of other people. It's like, that's a remarkable, cool journey. Something you were saying a second ago, I would love to know what this looks like. This was, I don't know specifically, this was 2010 with the first child. You said you were kind of catching onto a tailwind. Mm-hmm. When you see a tailwind, what happens next? Like, what are you diving into to understand it better?
Well, let's use a real life example. Try to see which one's better. Okay, we'll use carbonated soft drinks. So I, having grown up in the Midwest, I used to have Coke, Pepsi in my refrigerator, and it wasn't uncommon. Any time of the day, I could just grab one. And now other households were more strict on things like that. But for the most part, we didn't know how bad drinking, carbonated soft drink loaded with sugar was. And so I found myself middle-aged, drinking one Coke a day, maybe two. And the problem was I just wanted that taste. And any other alternatives, I really couldn't, in my mind, they weren't good enough for me. My palate didn't love it. And then I discovered Bai. And my business partner, Rohan, invested in Bai very early on. And then we met and we invested together more. But when I tried my first Bai, I was blown away. The fact that it had so much flavor, 5 calories, 1 gram of sugar, naturally sweetened, and tastes great. And for me, that was the game changer because I said, okay, I'm not the only person that wants to kind of remove themselves from drinking carbonated soft drinks. There's others out there. I know it. And maybe they're not right now, but in a year or 2 or 3, more and more information is going to come out. And it's true. Look at sugar is not fake news. I don't think, there is misconceptions about different diets and keto and this and that, whether they're healthy for you or not. One thing I could probably say with pretty certainty is that there's never going to be a study that comes out and says you should have more sugar. I just don't think it's going to happen. And so knowing that was kind of where sugar is going to be public enemy number 1 at some point, and knowing that liquid is a huge carrier of sugar, I made that switch. And you think about what you save over the course of the year, 140 calories and 40 grams of sugar versus well, ultimately a buy was 18 ounces, 2 servings. So it was 10 calories and 2 grams of sugar. But that delta, that 38 grams per day you save times 365, that's meaningful. And if you can make a slight change like that, and so when I had my first buy, I blown away. I reached out to the founder. And that's around the same time I met Rohan, and we started kind of, spending time together and thinking about what we could do together, and we investing together. And I knew that this was something that was going to make a difference. And it's an evolution. It goes from Coke to the flavored waters, to kombucha, to sparkling water, into water. And that palate changes. And so, when we see a trend or we see something coming, we run. And we'll do research. Collagen's a perfect example. We invested in a brand called Vital Proteins. And collagen's been around for ages. And when we discovered Vital Proteins, we did a ton of category work. And so one of the hard parts is when you're trying to go where the puck's going, there's not a lot of consumer feedback that you can really get in terms of collagen. And we were lucky. There were white papers written on the effects of collagen and what it does. And what we found was that there's legit uses for it in terms of joint health. And then there was also this kind of placebo effect of it can also help with your hair, skin, and nails. And so for us, we had to make an early bet in a category that we thought would catch on. And our thesis was that we think collagen protein can be the new whey protein. It could be a massive, massive category, but we were early on. And so you can find some data, but again, you've got to have that gut and that instinct that you're backing a category creator. And that's what we try to do. We don't always get it. We think we have it and we don't, or the fast follower. If you get a category creator, you have the advantage of being the category creator, the first mover, the biggest brand, but you also have the challenge of the education. And education was, for Vital Proteins, they had to spend a lot of money and they had to do a lot of education to get the consumer familiar with what collagen is. And that's both the blessing and the curse. But when you think of collagen now, and you talk about collagen, and you mentioned Vital Proteins, when you think of collagen, is kind of the brand that you first think about in many minds. And I can't say all minds, but in a lot of people's minds, when they think of collagen, they think of Vital Proteins. And so being that category creator, that first mover, a lot of it is gut. I'm not going to lie. We have data, but when you're looking at a category that there's not a ton of information on, it's got to be through usage. You have to talk to other consumers who are using it and do surveys and understand why they're using it. And you have to ultimately say, is this product going to help change people's lives in a meaningful way? And if your answer is yes, and your gut says yes, and some of the data says yes, then we take that leap. You're not always going to be right, but we take that leap. And we happen to be right on collagen. The category's expanded. Now, how big can it get from here? I think it can get a lot bigger. But it's now more, you're seeing it in more things. You're seeing it in bars. You're seeing a lot of more kind of nutrition companies using collagen in their products than you did back in 2016.
I'm wondering, you talk about some of these factors that, there's just not enough data out there. How much do you put on the founding team or the early team within a company?
I think that's the most important part. When having a product that's amazing, sure, right? That can go. You can take an amazing product with an average founding team, and you can get pretty far. But I think you'll run into challenges. Finding a team and a founder or a founding team, I would back a better founding team with a worse product than a better product with a little bit less of a founding team. And I say that the only exception too would be if a founder understands what their weaknesses are and wants to win and doesn't care about being right or wants to win. And they're willing to say, yes, these are my blind spots. I need help here. That is huge to us. Being a knower, being kind of a learner, not a knower is a huge attribute that we love to see in founders. People who are humble, people who are willing to take risks, people that know where their blind spots are and aren't. And it's tough. It's the founder's baby. And so founding team is to us is even more important than the actual product itself.
Yeah, when they can suspend the ego and say, hey, I do not know these things, you guys can add even more support and cover some of their blind spots. You were mentioning Rohan, your partnership. So you guys are doing some investing. How does CAVU actually then come to be?
Yeah, so I always kind of had a vision kind of when I was going out there doing deals on my own. And then I started investing with Rohan, and we invested in a bunch of companies together. I went to him one day and said, listen, take Buy for an example. Buy was a brand that I think raised an additional $10 or $15 million, and they went to doctors in New Jersey. And I went to Rohan and I said, if we had a fund, we could have taken that $10 or $15 million round, right, that just went to kind of individual investors in New Jersey. And the thesis was you've been around this company very early. You've been helpful in a lot of ways. The founder and you have a good relationship where you work together and he'll come to you for advice. We don't run the business, right? And Rohan didn't run the business, but it was more of that consigliere to the founder, Ben. And I think that was one of our aha moments of, and we know the brand is going like this, why wouldn't we lever into it? And have an ability to lever into it. And that was kind of the first moment of, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Rohan, especially since he was, had more experience in the industry than I had at the time in consumer brands, a lot more actually. He was around some real amazing juggernauts early, like Vita Coco and Buy and the Vitamin Water and even Pop Chips. And so to have the ability and all the education, the mistakes that he's made on his own at Vitamin Water, but then also watched other entrepreneurs make, we thought there was an opportunity there to be able to put more money to work behind us if we had kind of an organized fund. The other premise was he saw the secular health and wellness theme as well. I think both of us were trying to find a way of, this is going to be massive. We think this is going to be a way of life. It's not just going to be a trend. It's at some point in time, every human being, and now it may take a generation to age up for that to happen, but at some point in time, most people are going to be concerned about their health and wellness, and understanding what they put in their body affects a whole variety of things that people didn't know it existed before. And so we started talking about a fund. And then for us, it was, we didn't want to be the other funds. And when we looked around and talked to other founders, two things kept coming up to us. One, actually three. One, it stopped being fun. So the minute that we took outside money, private equity money or venture capital money, it stopped being fun. Two, it seemed like when people would take money from venture capital firms or private equity firms, and this is a huge generalization, it happened occasionally, they would force more capital than was needed. And the third point was they wanted more value from their partners. And, for us, we didn't want to just be the boardroom naysayer and then just walk away from the business and be disruptive. We wanted to actually provide value add to all of our partners, along with making it fun, being founder friendly, but then also, being stage agnostic, right? So we'll put in a check, we'll start a company, we'll found a company, we'll put a check in as small as $1 million, and we've written a check as high as almost $100 million. So a lot of firms will be very specific on, you got to be at least this in sales, this in EBITDA, and then we'll invest. And we didn't want to force that. If we saw a great idea or great brand, why would we prevent ourselves from investing and being a part of it because, their revenue wasn't there? Well, it's going to be there in a year or two if we're right. So why not get in now and earlier and help kind of bring about that change? So as Rohan always says, we love to make the news, not just report it. And so we want to roll our sleeves up and we want to help these brands grow in any way we can. And so very early on, we focused a ton of resources on value add. And today we have an internal agency that's specific to CAVU that we built internally. And it does everything from creative packaging, package redesign, influencer programs, billboards, just the whole 360 activation marketing approach. We have Amazon DTC expertise. We're going to add to it over time. And so anyone we partner with has access to our uncommon agency. And instead of going out and saying, hey, we want to do new packaging. Well, we're able to go and say, hey, here's what we've done in the past. Here's our work. We're happy to do this for free. Or you can go hire an agency if you don't like our work and spend $250,000 or $300,000. And I think what's interesting is combining this value add is really aligned, because if you go hire an agency and you spend the money, it's very transactional. There's no emotion attached. They're going to come in, they're going to do your packaging job. They'll tell you exactly, they'll listen exactly to what you want. They're not going to push the envelope that much, because their job is to take the assignment, do the assignment well, and move on. With here, since we're invested and there's an emotional connection and attachment, like we're passionate about the packaging redesign, and we will push the envelope, and we will have dialogues with our founders that push the envelope in terms of pushing them a little bit, because our biggest job isn't to run the business. It is to create healthy debate and to cause founders to make sure they think about all the potential options. And we love more people around the table that can provide that value and that opinion in terms of pushing the thinking of an entrepreneur. And ultimately that entrepreneur makes a decision, what he or she wants to do, what they're going to go with their gut in the end. And we want to push that thinking in that envelope, because I think that's when you get the best product. I think that's when the best decisions get made. If everyone just agrees and goes along with it, I don't think you necessarily get to the best decision or the best outcome necessarily. And so I think having this value add is a huge differentiation for us. It's part of our DNA. It's our North Star. And I think aligning that with passion. Our whole firm is, Rohan and I's biggest bond is we love what we do and we're both passionate about it. It's very rare that you find a partnership where you're both equally as passionate about what you do. And especially in private equity venture capital, this is not to say all, because there are a lot of passionate people out there who are running funds, who are involved in funds out there. But a lot of people kind of go the model of go to a great college, go into investment banking. Investment banking leads to their first private equity venture capital job, and they kind of work up their route. And I question sometimes, is that person really passionate about what they're doing? Or are they there because that's just the path they follow at that time? And maybe it was like me when I was younger and saying, oh, I want to go to a place where I can make money. And so that's what I think really differentiates us, is that when we meet a new founder or brand, we're passionate about it. Like the energy that we bring, if we're excited about something, it really is one of the difference makers in terms of, I think it's been critical to any success we've had, to the partnership that Rohan and I have, and to the people that we look to bring into CAVU. We all look for people who are passionate and love what they're doing, or want to be a part of. Our motto is to democratize healthy living for all humans. We want people who buy into that and want to be a part of that journey. And we actually should change that motto to all creatures, because we invest in pet as well. We've made 2 pet investments, but that's kind of our mission, our North Star.
Well, I think the competitive advantage for CAVU has become a lot clearer. Like you can see how much value you guys add, and the differentiation, such as being stage agnostic, how important that is, how much that adds for you guys. One thing I love that you were talking about was creating that healthy debate. I'm obsessive around judgment, decision-making. I'm wondering for you, where do you see the most internal struggle with companies that you add the most value around decision-making specifically?
With companies who are looking to make difficult decisions, and where do they struggle with that?
Yeah.
Listen, I think it's a balance. I think having too many cooks in the kitchen is not great, because I think you could get very differing views, and it could cause a lot of confusion and paralysis by analysis a little bit. Listen, I think change is hard. It goes back to that analogy of working on a weakness, like working on my backhand when I was a kid. Like, yes, I chose tennis because it was my worst sport, and it was humbling. And I think that trait carried with me today. When I have success or I fail, I kind of like I've been there before in terms of that experience. I think founders, just like anyone else in life, I think it's when you're making a radical change. Either you're you have to change your business for some reason, or some innovation didn't work, or, you want to change your packaging. That's a perfect example. There was a brand we invested in called One Bar. And at the time, if you look at the old One Bar packaging, the company had been around for a long time. The founder, Ron, is a great guy. And he had created bars previously. And then it wasn't until probably 2015, he kind of launched this product called the One Bar. And the One Bar went like this in the specialty channel, and gyms and GNC. And we noticed it. And then we tasted the product, and we were blown away. The problem was, it goes back to the earlier analogy, the packaging was more of a Ford on the outside, and it had a Ferrari on the inside. But a lot of people, and the business was doing so well with that packaging, despite it, I should say. When we invested, and and I give Ron a lot of credit. There's two major things I think really helped that business. You had to have an amazing founder story, and Ron, where he loved to spend his time, was on making bars. He loved the innovation piece of it. I don't know how much he actually loved running the day-to-day. And so when we invested in One Bar, we helped find a great management team, a guy named Peter Burns, who had run Justin's and some other businesses in the past, and a very great operator. And we also talked to kind of the founder about, we also need to change your packaging, and we think you should change your packaging. And he was completely open to it. And again, we always have these conversations before we invest, to say, hey, this is kind of our thinking. Are you aligned? Because I think you have to have those transparent, honest conversations, because what you don't want to do is getting into a financial marriage, so to speak, is a lot harder to exit than, I guess, a real life marriage, unfortunately, right? It's a lot easier, I guess, to go say, okay, sorry, it's not working, let's get divorced. And a financial kind of arrangement, I guess, and when you're working together and, founders raise money, it's a lot harder to say, okay, well, it's not working. How do we, end this, right? And so our biggest thing is we have these conversations with our founders and partners early on to say, okay, what's your vision? How can we help in that? Where are your biggest pain points? And we make sure we're aligned on, well, this is what we think we would probably do. And you get alignment up front, it makes it a lot easier and smoother of a ride, because those are things that you discussed and talked about. Now, those may change, and that's okay, right? If you say, hey, listen, I actually think we don't need this anymore, and then that's good. Okay, awesome. But in One Bar, that was a company that having great success, but needed new packaging. And so Ron was aligned, and we internally did that. And I give Stevie Clements, who works on our own common team, and also Andrew Haynes, they did the repackaging for One Bar. If you look at the before and after. And so I remember when we showed it to Ron, it was a radical change. It wasn't an evolution where it's like, tweak here, you tweak this, the color gradient. No, it was a radical change. And the founder, we could see it. He froze a little bit, and I would too. It's his baby. He's put his blood, sweat, and tears into this business, and it's like, oh my gosh, what happens if I change this packaging and it doesn't work, and the business goes like this, right? And so I think sometimes founders have a hard time, and it's understandable. It's change. Change is hard. And no one wakes up and says, I want to change my routine today, or I want to change what I do for a living. Like, change is hard. And I think the ones that are able to, willing to take those calculated risks to make those changes could be the step change to the business. And with One Bar, that was a rocket booster for their company. We launched that new packaging. We changed the name to just one brand. So it could be a platform with everything with 1 gram of sugar. And the brand went like that, exploded. And so I think decision-making, again, to land the plane, comes down to when there's really difficult changes for the founder to make for the business, that if they're right, could be a huge step change in a really positive way. But it's scary. You don't know if it's going to work or not. And that's typically where we see a little bit of hesitation or trepidation in terms of changing things up a little bit. And in some cases, you don't have to. Sometimes you don't have to make some radical changes. But in that case, we thought we needed to make more of a radical one versus a tweak here, a tweak there. Because if it's working, you don't want to break it. So that's kind of, in some decision making, I think founders sometimes struggle with.
No. That's deeply insightful. And to stick with the landing the plane analogy, I know we're coming down here shortly. I am curious though. We're kind of talking about other founders you worked with. What about for you? What do you think you were just spending too much time on earlier in your career that as you advanced, you realized, you know what, this was a total waste. I could reallocate my focus elsewhere?
That's a great question. Well, for me personally, I think I was way too involved in the data, like playing to my strengths or my weakness, like using my weaknesses a little bit too much more than my strengths. And what I mean by that is, I find myself sometimes getting bogged down in areas of CAVU that I'm probably not as good at. But it's just been that way because when we started the firm, you didn't start with much. It was okay, like here we go, right? And you're on your own, and then you make a couple hires, and then you add to it. So it's probably hiring great people around you and giving them the ability to run. And I think earlier on, I probably was a little less, because again, it goes back to that founder analogy of, letting go a little bit and allowing people who are actually smarter than you run the play. And so if I look at myself today versus 5, 7, 10 years ago, you don't have to do it all by yourself. You have a team, and it's letting your team run the play and trusting in them that they're going to run it, and they're going to run it better than you. And I think focusing on your strengths, spending the time in areas that you're actually good at, is one thing I would have changed up. And I've done that. I spent a good chunk of my time on things that I'm good at versus spending time on things that I'm not good at. And quite frankly, if you're not good at something, you're probably likely you're not passionate about it, that piece of that business. And so it makes sense that, there's probably gonna be limited growth there. And I think hiring has been, in terms of just what I underestimated when I started CAVU was just the impact, of being a leader and being responsible in a lot of ways for the career development. That is something that I spent a ton of time on, and I probably underestimated how much time I would need to spend on it, and also how much I care. Like I always knew I care about my team, but it's almost like being a parent. You're a parent. It's like if my son has a bad day, I have a hard time sleeping. And it's the same thing when you're running your own business. And it's like if so-and-so is either struggling with something, or it's like it affects me just like it affects me when my children has a bad day, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what can I do to fix that? And so the mental time spent, because all these people, I want them all who work on our team, they're family. And when they're not with their own family, they're spending more time in this family. And that's a very huge responsibility that I think I underestimated, but it's an important one. It's something that, was to me was one of my biggest underestimations when going into it. What didn't I know, type of thing.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. That mental time spent in terms of the other people on your team, it's true. You view them like your kids, your family. It really takes a lot of time, a lot of energy for that. I love you also hitting on strength, gets built on strength there. When you're attacking your weaknesses, you might be going up incremental percentage points. If you want a 10, 100x, you've got to be going after your strength. So I think that's such a great point. I know we're going to round it out here. I would love to know what's next for you and both CAVU. What's like really at the top of the mind right now for you guys?
Yeah, I've probably never been more energized and excited in terms of where the world's going. Listen, we started CAVU with a primary focus on food and beverage, and we still work in food and beverage and love food and beverage, and we're going to make many more investments in food and beverage. But what's changed is it starts with what you put in your body, as we talked about, and then it goes to, okay, well, what do you put on your body? So skin, shampoo. So, personal care and beauty are several years behind food. Strategics in those categories now are wide awake that some of their brands aren't resonating with today's millennial or Gen Z consumer, as we call them, Genzennials, and that there needs to be a better focus on transparency, on sustainability, on ingredients, and you have to have efficacy as well. So I think it goes with CAVU's gone from what you put in your body to what you put on your body. And then I think COVID has helped accelerate. And you look at, the people who unfortunately got really sick or died during COVID, outside of age, obesity was the number 2 cause of, common links. And so I think there is a hyper focus on health and wellness now. I think people, if they weren't there before, have started to realize, oh my gosh, like my weight could affect my health more. And so I think there has been a massive shift again, where I think we've moved it along here even more, where now more and more consumers are aware of health and wellness, and they want to make it more part of their life. And so we're looking at things in human performance. We invested in a brand called Whoop, and tracking sleep. I mean, think about that, for example, right? We focus so much time on, there's always old sayings that grind, sleep is for the weak. I can go on 3 hours or 4 hours of sleep. And what we found out now is that it's actually the opposite. Like if you don't have optimal sleep, there's 3 pillars of health, right? It's sleep is kind of the main foundation. And then it's kind of like food, nutrition, and exercise on top. If your sleep is off, it's going to affect your nutrition because you're going to be more prone to sugary foods and carbohydrates. And your exercise performance, obviously, you can, that's going to be off as well. And you feel it. And so I'm excited about human performance. Being able to track, just from a Whoop alone, you look at your respiratory rate, your resting heart rate, your sleep, how much REM sleep you're getting. So I think we're only scratching the surface. I think more and more people, if you are going to truly, the personalization of not only nutrition is coming, where it's not just a generic fill out this 5-question survey and we'll send you some vitamins. It's ultimately actually doing lab work, where you can almost do lab work in your home, take those results and have them translated into what foods you should and shouldn't be eating from an allergy perspective, and also just, cholesterol and all these different factors. And then tying that together with, well, how much sleep are you getting? And tying that together with, what's your exercise look like? And so I do feel that there's going to be this 360 health and wellness platform coming, where it ties in sleep, it ties in exercise, it ties in nutrition. And I couldn't be more excited about kind of that. And so for us, it's been an evolution. Health and wellness has evolved, and we have to evolve with it, because before it was more of a focus on food, but now we're realizing there's all the things out there like exercise, now sleep, mental aspect is huge to health, not just the physical. So couldn't be more excited. Again, as you go into any new category, we don't just dive in head first. We spent 4 years studying and understanding beauty, right? To get that edge, to meet a bunch of founders, to understand how those channels work and how they may differ for food and beverage. But what's holistically common is we're building consumer brands that have to resonate with people. And I think our greatest skill set is identifying trends early, finding great, amazing category creators with great founders, and then being able to amplify those voices and those brands to be kind of the leader in their respective categories.
Oh, I absolutely love it. You talk about great founders as well. You're mentioning the Whoop. I think it was back in 2018, maybe episode 102, 103. We had Willamette from Whoop on. You want to dive into someone's mindset. That was a great episode with him. Final one here, Brett. You know how much I respect you. I could do this all day with you, but I would love to know if you were doing something like this similar with someone dead or alive, just not a family member or friend, who would you love having just a long form conversation with?
If I could have a conversation with anyone, alive or dead. Honestly, I'm going to take maybe a cheesy answer here. I'm going to say my grandfather. I would love to. My only regret was I wish, and he was such an impactful part of my life, and I've talked to him a lot about on this talk here. I'd love to be able to, the grown-up version, the adult version, to be able to have some more insightful conversations on like how he did it, how he made it, some of the things that he valued. Now, I saw a lot of it as a young kid, but I'd love to be able to sit and have a conversation with him today. And having gone through what I've gone through and the experiences I've gone through. And so I'd love to have one more conversation with my grandfather.
That's awesome. Brett, you're the man. I appreciate this. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah. It was awesome.
Cool.
And thank you for having me, and we'll do it again soon.
Got you there with DeLaney.